In the Taiwan Strait, more than 10 Chinese maritime militia vessels moved in without using direct force or other non-lethal pressure tactics. The moment the PLA Navy's Type 056A frigate appeared to step in, a laser was aimed at the USS Higgins, while military systems were visibly in play. Faced with such a deliberate rise in tension, the response was a clear signal that Washington was prepared to set firm limits with Beijing. At 2 p.m., in one of the world's most strategic and sensitive sea lanes, the guided missile destroyer USS Higgins, a floating stronghold valued at around $2 billion, was carrying out a lawful freedom of navigation mission. Then, the calm began to break. On the radar, more than 100 unidentified contacts started moving closer. These were not ordinary fishing boats. This was a fleet tied to Beijing, operating in the Taiwan Strait, the same corridor through which more than half of the world's semiconductors travel. Any serious disruption here would send shockwaves through the global economy. Beijing knows that well. By relying on its maritime militia, vessels presented as civilian fishing boats but backed by the state, it is pursuing a sophisticated gray zone strategy, applying pressure, creating intimidation, and trying to shift the balance without openly crossing the line while still preserving plausible deniability. The goal is clear: transform a routine patrol into an international flashpoint and push the situation as far as possible. On the waters of the Taiwan Strait, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS Higgins, also known as DDG-76, stretches 505 feet long and moves with quiet, controlled precision. Its mission is to patrol and help preserve stability along this vital route. Inside the Combat Information Center, a green glow pours from dozens of tactical displays. The Aegis Baseline 10 combat system, able to process an enormous stream of information every second, merges data from every sensor into one unified operational picture. Above, the four faces of the SPY-6 radar, mounted on the ship's superstructure, continue their steady sweep across the surrounding air and sea. At 14:15, the first warning came not from the radar, but from far above Earth. A KH-12 reconnaissance satellite, America's constant eye in orbit, transmitted a secure, high-speed stream of data. Within 45 seconds, Aegis matched the satellite imagery with AIS signals, the automatic identification system used by vessels on the surface. In an instant, the patrol was no longer routine. Aegis flagged an unusual formation, more than 100 Type 038 steel-hulled fishing boats. Their movement was too coordinated, their speeds too consistent. They were not scattered like working fishing vessels, but arranged in a multi-axis pincer pattern designed to restrict the Higgins route. The satellite imagery confirmed what the system had already begun to suspect. The decks were empty, no nets were in the water. There were no visible signs of commercial fishing activity. These details pointed clearly to the People's Armed Forces Maritime Militia. Then came another report from operations, delivered with calm urgency. 40 AIS transponders had gone dark at the same moment. On the screens, the AIS markers blinked out and were replaced by yellow radar contacts. In a single move, the flotilla had shed its digital identity. No signals, no transparent identification. Their intent was no longer in doubt. A steel pincer was now closing from both east and west, shrinking the American destroyer's 5 nautical mile safety buffer at a rate of 3 nautical miles per minute. This was not a simple misunderstanding. It was a carefully coordinated move, designed to pressure, obstruct, and provoke a situation with global attention. The tactical action officer studied the screen. The intent was obvious, but the response from the United States remained controlled and by the book. The USS Higgins held its course. Then the order came: activate the deterrence chain. In that moment, the ship transitioned from passive presence to active defense. The first layer of response moved into the air. On the aft deck, a small team prepared a Scan Eagle drone. A burst of compressed air launched it forward, and within seconds, the aircraft was climbing. With a wingspan of just 9 feet, it produced only a faint hum as it reached an operational altitude of 10,000 feet. From above, it became a quiet, nearly invisible observer, a constant eye watching everything unfold. Its optical and infrared cameras locked onto the approaching vessels, cutting through the illusion of civilian activity. The drone captured clear, undeniable details: concealed identification numbers, crew moving across empty decks, and no signs of actual fishing gear in use. Every frame of data streamed directly back to the Combat Information Center and onward to Pacific Command. On the other side, the command structure behind the Maritime Militia realized something had changed. The drone itself might not have been visible at that altitude, but their radar and electronic monitoring systems had picked up its presence. They knew they were being watched closely from above. Inside Higgins Command Center, a broadcast began across open maritime channels, repeated in both English and Chinese, directed ship by ship. You are not engaged in fishing operations. Alter your course immediately. In an instant, the cover story began to fall apart. Vessels on the outer edge of the formation hesitated. The tight coordination started to loosen. What had been a unified group of more than 100 ships began to fragment, shrinking to around 50. Confusion set in. Confidence was fading. But a smaller core, roughly 30 vessels, kept pressing forward, closing the gap to 8 nautical miles. The next step was deployed. The LRAD 100X long-range acoustic system was activated and aimed at the lead boats. A focused beam of sound, reaching up to 162 decibels, projected out to a distance of nearly 3,000 yards. This wasn't random noise. It was tightly directed acoustic energy designed to create intense discomfort for anyone in its path. The effect was immediate. Another wave of militia boats broke away, turning off course to escape the overwhelming sound pressure. The number dropped again, leaving only about 15 vessels still advancing. Those remaining ships pushed closer, cutting across the bow of the Higgins at a risky distance of just 3 nautical miles. At that point, the final step before any further escalation was set in motion. A firm order was given. The command came through. Deploy the water cannons and activate the searchlights. At once, high-pressure jets began blasting seawater with immense force, pushing out thousands of gallons per minute. 2 sweeping arcs of water, driven by pressure approaching 1,000 pounds per square inch, created a moving barrier more than 200 feet wide. At the same time, floodlights rated at 5 million candela lit up the entire scene as bright as day. The crews aboard the Chinese militia boats were hit by a sudden wall of water and intense light. Their decks were quickly soaked, movement became difficult, and panic was visible as they struggled to stay in control. It was still a non-lethal response, but one powerful enough to physically block their advance. That final non-violent measure worked. 10 more vessels broke away, their crews unable to continue under the pounding water and blinding glare. By 1425, only 5 boats were left. These were the most committed units, still trying to hold their course and obstruct the Higgins. But then the situation shifted sharply, moving beyond gray zone pressure into open military confrontation. A new contact flashed onto the Aegis display, a fast-moving yellow symbol on a direct intercept course. Seconds later, Aegis escalated the warning to red. A high-speed contact had been identified, a Type 056A Chinese naval escort ship. This was no disguised civilian vessel, it was a modern warship, a more capable 2025 upgraded variant, cutting through the darkness with clear intent. It closed to within 2 nautical miles of the Higgins, an aggressive and highly unsafe maneuver that ignored standard maritime conduct. Then its systems came alive. The Type 364 fire control radar locked onto the Higgins, while a military-grade green laser swept across the American destroyer's command bridge. Its AK-176 76mm main gun stood ready. This was no longer a game of shadows and deniability. The gray zone encounter was over. It had become a direct military standoff. The Chinese warship continued closing at an extremely dangerous distance, reckless and openly confrontational. And instead of using conventional fire, it used light, a military laser intended to disrupt sensors and potentially affect personnel. The beam crossed the Higgins Bridge, making one thing clear. The rules of the encounter had changed. Restraint had been answered with open hostility. Inside the CIC, the tactical action officer responded immediately. Under the rules of engagement, authorization was given. The Mark 45 5-inch gun, the destroyer's iron fist, elevated into position. The order was carried out. With a thunderous blast that rolled across the sea and shook the ship from end to end, a single round left the barrel. It was not aimed at the Chinese vessel itself. Instead, it streaked out at supersonic speed and detonated 2 nautical miles ahead of the Type 056A's bow. A clear and unmistakable signal. But on the tactical displays inside Higgins, the Chinese ship's fire control radar remained locked on target. It did not turn away. In fact, it made a slight course adjustment that seemed to place it even more directly in position for a possible collision. The laser continued sweeping across the American ship in a clear act of defiance. The tactical action officer made the next decision. A second warning round was ordered, this time set to burst just 500 yards ahead of the target. At the same time, the USS Higgins shifted fully into high combat readiness. Every system on board moved from monitoring to action mode. The AN/SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite switched into an active posture, ready to disrupt and counter incoming threats. Below deck, the vertical launch system stood by, prepared to deploy ESSM medium-range missiles at a moment's notice. This was no longer just about signaling. The ship was now ready for a real confrontation if needed. The Mark 45 gun fired again. This time, the impact was impossible to ignore. A massive column of white water surged hundreds of feet into the air, erupting directly in front of the Type 056A's path. The shockwave rippled across the surface. The approaching ship visibly reacted, the crew thrown into confusion, the situation suddenly undeniable. The message had been delivered. A line had been drawn. The captain of the Type 056A faced a critical choice and made the only logical one. The ship executed a sharp 90-degree turn and accelerated away from the area. With their military support pulling back, the remaining militia vessels lost cohesion. One by one, they broke formation, switched off their AIS signals, and disappeared from the Higgins screens. By 15:05 local time, the sea lane was clear. What had appeared as a coordinated ghost fleet had been exposed, challenged, and ultimately dispersed. This moment carried weight far beyond the immediate encounter. The sequence of non-lethal actions removed any room for denial. The escalation had been reversed through controlled, measured force. While one side reacted in minutes with clarity, the other lost valuable time in confusion. The takeaway was unmistakable. Clear evidence cuts through ambiguity, and disciplined response overcomes reckless pressure. On the Higgins command deck, the sound of the gunfire faded into the distance, but the signal sent across the region remained strong. This waterway operates under international rules, not intimidation. For the crew, it marked the end of another patrol, another mission completed. But for the broader picture, it became a case study in miscalculation. The assumption that restraint would always mean inaction proved wrong. Strategies built on uncertainty and pressure only succeed when the other side hesitates. This time, hesitation never came. It also underscored a larger reality. The use of conventional military assets to raise pressure brings equally direct responses. Crossing clearly defined boundaries carries immediate consequences, forcing a reassessment of future risks. The invisible barrier had been tested and held. This encounter highlighted not only operational readiness, but also the role of maintaining open and secure sea routes. It reinforced how modern systems, coordination, and discipline shape outcomes in high-pressure environments. The story was originally reported by U.S. sources and referenced from UNI News. If you think professionalism and composure made the difference here, let me know your thoughts. And here's something to consider. If you were the tactical action officer on the Higgins at the moment the laser was used, would you order a warning shot right away or choose a different response? What would your call be?